Maria. She's new here. Maria, you can introduce yourself.
First of all, I am PhD student with Mrs. Torres-Stavro. She inspired me about this. And I'm doing my PhD about patient safety. And I hope to continue.
Okay.
Can I ask Maria to be here as an observer?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other introductions needed?
Just came to my mind that are you part of the other group that you have published together with Peter Griffiths?
So I'm based at University of Southampton and work with Peter Griffiths. Yeah,
I was just thinking that there is the other group. I noticed some publications.
Yes.
Is it Miscare Group or something?
Yes, we were discussing this this morning with Jane.
So that phrase that's on the bottom of our paper relates to the project group. So we have a large grant from English funding, the National Institute for Health Research, that funded us to do a study in a single hospital. So that the Miscare Group, that's the name of our whatever we call it. That's the name of our study group. So it included the researchers on that study and some of the clinicians who had been part of the wider team. But the study actually had researchers from University of York and then economists out there, and different people plus the team in Southampton.
Is it the national or international?
It was a project, a study group. And the project was nationally funded, conducted in a single hospital in the south of England.
Okay, good for the clarifications. Any more? Anybody?
Jane, are you joining Renfair now, or am
I spoke with Everdiki, and actually, I'm going to be down as a substitute because you already have somebody, I think, for England, do you?
Yes.
I thought
okay.
it was there's another group working on this work.
Yes, yeah.
Our aim from the beginning was to gather everybody.
Yes, that's right.
So I missed that group, and when I found it, I asked Peter Griffiths.
Yes.
He's doing a lot of work on that.
Yeah.
And we're working with Jane.
Yes.
So Jane is here. And she's not a member of the MC, but she will apply to be as a substitute.
Okay.
So I think that their contribution to they will have a very good contribution. And we had a big discussion yesterday. And thank you, Jane, for your input. It was very useful. So we welcome you to the MC.
Okay, any other elements before we start? If not, then I think we have to start with 3 presentations, that we have some global overview, and then we can start about some reflections with some questions we can raise and so on. And I give the floor to Terry to give some overview, and you have a paper in explaining, but it's good to bring everything to the floor because it's quite helpful for our discussion.
So, thank you, everyone, for inviting me and bringing me across the pond, as we say, to join you all. I think it's a great conversation to have, and so thank you, Everdiki, for getting this started. I think it's been wonderful just for me personally to be able to interact with so many different people of like mind, and who, though we're far apart physically, we seem to come together around much of this, and so I appreciate the opportunity. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about what I'm calling the boundaries, or the definition, really, getting it, or do we really define it the same way? Because I think that we have to agree on that, because the concept should be tied to how we defined it. So whatever terminology we use, we need to link to that. So starting with sort of what boundaries do we want to put around the phenomenon, and then look at some of the terms that are already out there being used. And so, in the early days, that was finding everybody. I think there was more literature out there than what I knew, because I was looking for the literature using one terminology, starting with certainly Maria's work on rationing, and then shortly thereafter, so in digging in and trying to do that first review paper, you come across these other things, and you realize that there was work before And so the question then is, are we all talking about the same thing? And are we all, but using different words, or are we really talking sort of about different things? So I think as a sort of starting point, where hopefully there's some agreement, is this idea of the phenomenon is that there are known nursing interventions and activities out there that are beneficial to patients, but that for some reason they're not reaching the patient, right? So there's some barrier between this body of activity that could be beneficial to patients, but they're not receiving it for some reason. So in the medical literature, that particular phenomenon, they use the term underuse. And so you'll see some articles where they talk about sort of the three, in the quality and safety world, the three problems, overuse, underuse, and misuse. So this idea of underuse is when patients don't receive the medical services that would be potentially beneficial. So if we borrow that term then and try to apply it to nurses, then sort of that's where we start. But then you think, well, why aren't patients getting all of the nursing services that would be beneficial? So again, sort of using the medical analogy, perhaps it's an issue of access. So if there are people that just aren't accessing the system, they don't even come near a nurse, and so that there might be something we could do to help them, but if we don't know about them. And so certainly in some countries where you don't have a national health system, access is a bit of a problem. And then maybe it's that we're offering services that patients aren't compliant, right? So those are two reasons. And then you have all of these others that some would classify as an error, so to speak. So the patients have come in contact with the nurse, but either the nurse, perhaps they don't know that something is potentially beneficial, they didn't know they were supposed to do it, or they didn't have the skill to do it. Maybe they knew they started but were interrupted or distracted and then maybe didn't get back to it. So it was they knew they should do it. Maybe it was miscommunicated, the night shift didn't tell the day shift that something was supposed to happen, or the orders weren't clear, or whatever. And then maybe it was that there were some material resources not available that one needed. So if you need to turn an obese patient into lift equipment isn't available, then maybe that's why it didn't get done. And then finally over here, this idea of human resources. The nurses don't have enough time, right? So those are all potential reasons why patients might not get what they're supposed to get. And so I think the question is, at least in my mind, is when I talk about our phenomenon, am I talking about only this issue over here, the phenomenon where the reason, so it's tied to the reason that patients aren't getting that. So do we want to name this and use this as a unique concept, or do we include all of these other things, or all of these? I mean, so I think that's, hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a little bit. When I first started on this journey, in my mind, this was the phenomenon. It's that, what happens when nurses simply do not have time to do everything that they know they're supposed to be doing, or they believe they're supposed to be doing for these patients. So it's really a supply-demand issue that the time for care is not sufficient in relation to the demand for care. And so it's this, I think this picture where you have nurses trying to juggle. And it sort of started from the acute care environment. Now, since then, people are looking at this phenomenon in other environments, but this is sort of where it began, at least for me. And so the first thing I read in the literature was using the term tasks undone, and that was with Dr. Aiken's group. And it was a small part of a larger study, and so it was almost buried. And so I think that's why it wasn't certainly even in the title. It was part of an outcome study. But they used that term and they had a short survey on it. But it was very clear to me in reading that their intention was it was about human resources, that they didn't have time to do it. So since then, of course, we have all these other terms: nursing care undone, tasks incomplete, implicit rationing, errors of omission, missed care. So when I was trying to put all this together, the reason I came up with the term unfinished nursing care, unfinished care, was because I wanted to try